So my name is Liz Bradley. You've heard from me before. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. It's been my pleasure to help organize this, and it's now a treat for me to moderate our next panel on AI and machine learning. ML is a subset of AI. Anyway, before we begin, let me quickly introduce each of our distinguished panelists. From the right to the left, we have Dr. Talitha Washington, inaugural director of the Atlanta University Center Consortium's Data Science Initiative. She is also the president-elect of the Association for Women in Mathematics and has previously been on the faculty at Howard University and Clark Atlanta University and a program director at the NSF. Then we have Patty Ordonez, who is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, where she has pioneered advances in biomedical data science. She founded the Symposium of Health Informatics for Latin America and the Caribbean. Then we have Chad Jenkins, a professor of computer science and engineering at the University of Michigan. He has discovered methods for computational reasoning and perception, that enable robots to effectively assist people in human environments. And he's a recipient of PCASE, the Presidential Early Career something scientists, yes. Scientists and engineers, there we go. And last but not least, Dr. Charles Isbell is Dean of the College of Computing and Executive Director of the Constellation Center for Equity in Computing within the college at the Georgia Institute of Technology. His research goal is to understand how to build autonomous agents that must live and interact with large numbers of other intelligent agents, both human and not. And we're going to have a conversation today about the evolution of the field of AI, including machine learning. We're going to explore how federal funding from NITRD has contributed to these revolutions. And I hope to save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for your questions, so please queue them up. And I hope to remember to ask if there are webinar people who wish to ask questions. We will take those. So with that, let's just dive in. And just to whet everyone's appetite, I'm going to start with a single question to all of our panelists, and we'll come to Talitha first. What is AI's most important contribution to date? And we're giving them 1 minute each on this.
To date. So I think AI is challenging us to, so I'm going to take a step back from the question, that AI is challenging us to really think about what does it mean to be intelligent? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to think? What does it mean to make a decision? What does it mean to do these things that we do as human beings? And then trying to replicate that either in a machine or I'm sure an autonomous car can drive better than I can, right? And so that idea is pushing and challenging us to think, what does it mean to be human, intelligence, all of these things? And then how are we going to make decisions, and for whom and for how? And thinking about the potential positive attributes, but also the potential negative harms it could have on different people. So I think that the challenge AI brings us really is the most important contribution. So if you think about the movie I, Robot with Will Smith, where he tells the robot, I thought you were dead, and the robot says, technically I was never alive, but I appreciate your concern. So it's that interplay with technology and humans, and what is that divide and where's the overlap?
Okay. Patty, what do you think?
So I think one of the things that I see the potential with AI is like the potential for computational science and really doing interdisciplinary work and collaborate with other disciplines to push those disciplines and science and STEM in general ahead. And I just have seen tremendous transformation on our campus. From when I got there, everything was silos, and we started doing a data science program, or biomedical data science, and suddenly now everybody wants to take the lead in doing the next computational science. People who told me at first, oh, I'm only going to direct this, I'll just be involved for the students, are now leading NIH projects in this case computational genomics, which is a whole new field, which was necessary in Puerto Rico. Because due to the devastation of the hurricane, right, we'd always done more hands-on science. But when the hurricane came, it destroyed years of work, especially, it's not just the hurricane, the 3-month blackout, right? If you can imagine having 3 months of no electricity and what that would impact your research. So that right there is forcing, the climate changes are forcing changes that have to happen in the Caribbean.
All right, my turn? Great. So I'm going to push back on that question, and I'm going to say that asking what the biggest success or accomplishment of AI is like asking, what's the biggest accomplishment of putting printed words on paper? I think there's way too many. So I'll put it in context for different times. If you're asking me when I'm sitting around my house and just hanging out, the biggest accomplishment of AI is putting the first down marker on the football field when I'm when I'm watching TV. If you're asking, I'm actually skipping part of a robotics conference in Philadelphia right now. So I had to drive down from Philadelphia to DC. And so if you're asking me in my daily life, being able to get route navigation and the way that it works so seamlessly and flawlessly, those search algorithms are one major thing that we don't even think about. It's been so successful in AI. But actually, if I'm being real about, about what in my profession has been the thing that helps me professionally the most, is having access to be able to search the wealth of information that's available on online, the archives that we have. I can, if I need to look up, the convergence properties of a gradient descent algorithm, it's readily available. I don't have to go to the library. If I want to look up something frivolous, like who played Squiggy on Laverne and Shirley, that's like readily available. Or if I want to check the forecast around my parents' house in Houston, it's right there, and AI makes that accessible to me.
So what I like about all of these answers is that they pop away from the kind of easy thing, which is about, well, what's the technology? What's the simple thing you could point to? In fact, Chad, because Chad stole exactly my example, which was maps, which is miraculous. If this were 40 or 50 years ago and you said, well, one day we'll have machines that will help us navigate through traffic, figure out the fastest way to get to whatever, and adjust, you'd say, oh, that's science fiction. And now we not only take it for granted, we complain about it when it doesn't do exactly what we want it to do. It's much like, I think by analogy, the fact that probably everybody here has been on an airplane recently. Or certainly 2 or 3 years ago, you were getting on an airplane a lot, and you just neglected to recognize the absolute miracle that you can get from one side of the world to the other without taking months and catching cholera, right? That's amazing, right? So I think but the technology itself is in some sense a side effect. What I think is really important about what AI has done for us, and I tend to think about these things generally, is that it's given us an approach. It's a way of thinking, right? The goal is not tool sets or skill sets, it's mindsets. And what AI has done for us, in particular machine learning, which is not a subset of AI, but anyway, but particularly is that it's given us a way of recognizing something that as computationalists we did not recognize several decades ago. We thought about computation manipulating and affecting data. And what we know from AI and machine learning is that data manipulates computation, that it changes the algorithm, it changes behavior. And that tiny little flip is what has opened up so many things that have enabled us to do all the incredible things that have come out, technology or ways of thinking around AI.
Thank you. So now we're going to kick off a conversation with some questions directed to individual panelists that they'll answer, and then others will weigh in. And so we're going to go, we went that way, now we're going to come back, so that means that Charles is the anchor here. Charles, AI, perhaps more than any other field, has gone through periods of boom and bust. Can you comment on that dynamic and the role of federal funding in leading to the current revolution that we're witnessing today?
So I think it's a great question because there's some of us are old enough to remember the AI winter, Timothy, and some of us are old enough to have heard stories about it, but many of us who've been doing this for the last couple of years don't remember a time when AI was a bad word. It used to be a bad word. You would actually get in trouble if you said that you did AI. And that's really that really affected the people who were my advisors. It affected the kind of work that was done in the 80s and the early 90s, just as the current expression of interest around it is shaping so much of what is happening in research and in technology in the 2020s. What I think is important, whether things go up or whether things go down, is that there has to be a steady infusion of investment and thought. Because the goal here is not to do something interesting for the next 2 or 3 years. It's not to get your IPO out and make $1 billion. The goal is to fundamentally change what we do and make life better for humans. And that is a long-term endeavor. So what government is able to do, right? Government doesn't exist to invest in the short term. Government exists to invest in the long term, even when things are actually bad in the short term, right? Education is like that. research is like that. Expanding our knowledge is like that. And so I think that's a long way of saying something that I think is very simple, which is the important outcome of having a constant investment, whether it's popular or unpopular in things like AI and machine learning, is that we've been able to make that kind of a big difference. And in small ways. So when no one wanted to do it, there was still investment in this because people could see what was going to be interesting in the long term. And in large ways, by taking every once in a while a huge investment in things, to take the example from just a little while before, in self-driving cars. And just how completely different our lives are from just 20 years ago, or even just 10 years ago, because of that sort of investment. So I think fundamentally, this kind of investment in time, interest, treasure, in supporting long-term goals has completely changed all of computing, and certainly AI. And I hope that when the current things around deep learning become not as interesting to us as they are right now, there will continue to be this kind of investment, so that 20, 30 years later, we'll be able to talk about all the great things that came out after whatever the next AI winter is.
Anyone else care to pile on or disagree?
Sure, I have no shortage of opinions, especially on things that Charles says.
It's true.
But I think of the government, the federal government, as the most awesome venture capitalists that we could think of. In fact, they are adventure capitalists. We are on an adventure to develop new things that we may not realize for many decades. And so I think that's just another way another lens to put to sort of say the same things that Charles said.
I was going to say that I think that now I'm going to go with what Chad just said. I think we should go one step further and become like social entrepreneurs, not just adventure capitalists, right? But social entrepreneurs, and use AI, to an extent to actually make society better. And I'll just leave it at that, and we can talk about that more.
So I'm not speaking on behalf of NSF, but as a former program officer at NSF, we found that when we could use, I guess, federal funding as a carrot to move or drive and provide innovations. I was a program officer in the Convergence Accelerator, which essentially is the convergence of multiple disciplines, multiple sectors to solve problems of societal interest. And so part of our portfolio was the future of work and using AI to do that. I also I was in undergraduate STEM education and started the data science portfolio there. But what struck me as an African American, and I work at historically black colleges and universities, is that our voice, the African American voice, wasn't at the table. So that's kind of my mantra, is putting our voice, HBCUs, African Americans, at the table for data science. In particular, we've seen some harm that data science and artificial intelligence and ML, however you want to categorize it, has done. So these federal funding opportunities, in my view, it can move, it can catalyze, it can spur new innovations, but it needs to be done in a way that's thoughtful, and that's not always what we've done before, but really sit down and talk with stakeholders. How can we engage? How we can have more MSIs engage in this in ways that maybe are different from University of Michigan or Georgia Tech or another institution. So I think for federal funding, they need to be cognizant of how can we provide funding in ways that can broaden engagement in these hard topics, so it's not only a small pocket of those getting the funding, but really engaging all of society and all institutions.
Any other follow-ups on this? Or? All right, well then, riffing on that, how has NITRD and the innovation ecosystem that it has catalyzed helped shape your own career, Chad, and your perspective on AI and computing?
Right. So I think the short answer to that is Super Mario Kart 8. So people may not know what that means, but Super Mario Kart 8 is a video game on Nintendo Switch. There's no better thing that brings my family together than playing a round of Super Mario Kart 8. And it really, and it's part of my adventure into computing, because where I started was when my parents bought me an Atari 2600 in 1981. And I was like, wow, what is this thing, right? The television used to be the thing that I would watch shows on. Sanford & Son, Woody Woodpecker, I Love Lucy. I couldn't interact with those images. But then, the Atari 2600, which is the old video game system, allowed me to interact with this. It was amazing to be able to see what technology could do. And the reality is that didn't just come out. Atari didn't just invent this. It came from decades of innovation, from Vannevar Bush and JCR Licklider and all the things that they did to create the ecosystem that let digital computing flourish, that allowed me to be inspired and then be able to say, how do I make my own games? How can I do this? How does computing work? And by the time I got to college in 1992, just as the HPC Act was coming into bear, there were so many people like me who had been, who created an ecosystem of innovation, of discovery, of just trying to see where things could go. And that really, and that's something that we're seeing that from the early 90s, we've seen how much this is catalyzing now. There are so many students, so many people that are doing things across computing, whether it be video games and making Nintendo Switch, Zoom, teleconferencing, robotics, which is what I do, creating cloud computing, creating machine learning algorithms, natural language translation, where it was just Star Trek, where I would think about speaking into a device and it would translate for me. Now that is just something that I just take for granted. My kids take that for granted. We have so many students that are looking for opportunities in this space. And that really is we produce technology, innovation, ideas, but even more important than that, we produce people. We inspire people. That money exists in this ecosystem that just allows for innovation to flourish. And I am grateful that I've been a part of our nation where I've had this opportunity, because not everybody gets that.
Anyone else care to weigh in on this? So how has NITRD and the innovation ecosystem that has catalyzed helped shape your own career and your perspective? Anyone else? We have time. Everyone's like,
I mean, everything Chad said. I mean, in fact, it was an Atari for me. That was before they called it the 2600. And ping pong, the whole thing. That it was a real deal. I think, though, if I were going to draw something specific out of what Chad said, it's that it's the creation of that ecosystem that becomes almost invisible that matters. I think about how it's affected my career, in particular, in my own journey through what we've done, what I've been able to do or not been able to do with AI and machine learning, was exactly creating opportunities to do that, right? First, for me as an undergrad, to have access to technology that I certainly, having been raised on the wrong side of the tracks, wouldn't have had access to. Being able to do research, to go into grad school and do these amazing things with these amazing people because of the funding that they had, and to change the direction of the way that I thought about what was possible. We always underestimate these things. Like, I really liked what was said earlier about integrating people from all over. This ties into something that both of you have said about integrating people and not just agencies, and the way that they sort of think together. That is the ecosystem that matters. It is funded, yes. The money matters, yes. The buildings matter, yes. But it's creating a system where people can do interesting things. And when I think about how my work has changed and what I've focused on in the last 10 years, that's only because the number of people who are part of this has changed so much, and the sort of the diversity of their experiences and the things they're trying to accomplish have changed so much from, it was 1986 for me, but when I went to college, right? Youngster.
thoughts about people?
About people?
Well,
Yes.
about this, yeah, go for
Oh,
it.
yeah. I mean, I definitely think the idea of getting people into computing is critical for AI. And that means building trust with people. That means educating people, because they will not trust the technology unless we educate them. So I will add that. And that's education for all. It really needs to be a focus on education for all. So if there was one thing that I looked at yesterday on the panel, you put your tire treads, right?
Tire tracks.
Tire tracks. What? I'm sorry, not what. My jaw kind of dropped that education wasn't one of them. And so I asked you to think about that.
So in the Atlanta University Center, we're primarily African-American students, about 9,000 combined over 4 institutions. And one of the things that's worrying me is that we have students, comp sci majors, technology, all the rest of that, and they're looking at technology field as not inviting, not welcoming, not a path for them, because they see what happens in the media. They see what happens in reality. So one of the things that at least it bothers me is, how do I take and prepare and train up my students and kick them out into the world so they can actually contribute to these, we'll say, technology woes. that really impact them personally and their communities and our communities, collective communities. So I don't know how to solve that issue when I'm thinking about education and training and encouraging my students to go into fields that can be, to be frank, racist, hostile, that sort of thing. So I don't know. I don't have an answer. I just have a dilemma.
Yeah. Well, following up on that, Patty, how do we ensure that we are training the next generation of diverse talent for AI and R&D and AI readiness? Is it about communication and education? How do we do that?
I think it is. I think it has a lot to do with that. And I mean, I have to tell you a story because everybody's talking about storytelling, and I think a story is really important to kind of show. And I'll tell you my day yesterday. So yesterday I went to UMBC because it turns out that I got an offer at UMBC I can't turn down. And so I'll be leaving the University of Puerto Rico. Now it's 25% of the faculty that have left the University of Puerto Rico due to lack of funding, due to lack of resources. And of course, it's always the ones that are most talented that leave. And so as I did this, I walk onto my, I walk onto my campus. And so when I got to, let me step back. When I got to Puerto Rico, the reason I went there was one, I've never lived in a Hispanic-speaking community. And I was like, Freeman Brabowski said to me, Patty, that's the top producing institution of PhDs in STEM for Hispanic U.S. citizens and permanent residents and U.S. nationals, which I didn't know what U.S. nationals were, which they're basically people who are on territories but don't get citizenship. And so he told me that I had to go there because that would be a great experience. And so I did. What I didn't expect was what I got. I got students in my first class. First of all, we had 2 computer science classes. One was for non-majors and one was for majors. There were only 25 people in each class. Wow. And I didn't expect that my class didn't even know what computer science was. This was 2012. And the sad part is that in the last 2022, I still get people in my class who don't know what computer science is. And so that's the beginning. I had to give you some feedback. So now I have seen the UPR decline where it's lost 25% of its faculty, about 25% of the students. And the resources are like, you see, things aren't, because of the, there's the infrastructure is torn down. A building that's only 30 years old looks like it's 100 years old. And that was the natural sciences building. Then I walk on yesterday to UMBC, and I see tons of new buildings. There's even an interdisciplinary building that is there's just a building for interdisciplinary science. I see another building that is for, another building that's for arts, and I was just like, oh, wow, like this is incredible. And I asked myself, why this disparity? Why the disparity? And I've been thinking about that a lot, especially because when this is all happening, I saw, basically, when I got there, I told you number 1 on the ranking. By 2018, we were off the top 20. So all these wonderful things that are happening, they're not being adapted because people aren't educated about even what computer science is, right? And I see also in AI and computer science the potential to change a whole community. But what's happening? The best talent is leaving. So there has to be a way that we can produce talent, and at the same time, when we take that talent, like take the most talented, we give them a way to be able to give back, right? A way to be able to work with their communities. And I have lots of ideas about this if you want. Like I have tons of them because I've been doing them and I've been working in this. I couldn't leave for a long time because I knew I had connections because I went to really good universities that all my students did not have. And so if we create a way for students, maybe top tiers go to the top universities, and then other people go back, but there has to be a way for them to go back, and that is providing more funding at these institutions, minority-serving institutions. The other fact I will tell you that as I was looking at this, because I'm really trying to write letters and trying to figure out how we can get funding, I started looking at all minority-serving institutions. And I found something that was surprising, because we don't have many female faculty that do research in Puerto Rico. Yet we produce the most PhDs in STEM that are minorities, that are women of color. And I asked myself, why is that? Because I went to school with almost, my family at UMBC was not Latino. My academic family was not my family. My family didn't understand academia. My academic family was African American. And all of them, I looked at the talent, I was inspired by them, but a lot of them didn't get faculty positions. And we need to actually take a look at why that is. And so now ideas for how to fix this. I won't just be the doctor of doom, but that doom is necessary to be spoken here. It really has to be spoken here. So ideas. Right now, there's a wonderful opportunity to do informal education. We need to do informal education and combine it with academic. Now, I speak from this as a former technical trainer for a company that's similar to Training, et cetera, right? I don't know, you guys probably don't. UMBC Training Centers basically bought that company that I worked for 2 startups before. So I got confidence by working for them, and then actually learning how to code so that I could actually deal with all the people telling me, no, you don't have what it takes to become a PhD, or you don't have what it takes to become faculty. And so I think that building people's self-efficacy in computing is really important, and building it in their children is really important. And in particularly, I think of single moms and people in poverty that really could change their entire communities. They could really lift up their communities by teaching them about computing. And so there's this wonderful opportunity. We have rental, there's, HUD, I don't know if you know this, but HUD is no longer going to be funding maintenance at public housing. And I know this because there's a lot of public housing in Puerto Rico, and a lot of them are students of mine. But there is this other really wonderful program that's coming called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, or that's here. And Annapolis is planning to turn all of their, public housing into RADs by 2030. So, idea, why don't we create community learning centers in the poorest neighborhoods? Because RAD, what they're doing is that they're basically trying to put they're putting public housing, and on top of that, low affordable middle income housing on top of it, so that that income will pay for the maintenance. So why not put in each one of these places a community learning center where we can actually retrain adults to do this? We can retrain women in particular, or whoever the heads of households are in public housing, so that they can get out of poverty. So my other job, the other startup I work with, happened to be a software company that does certification of public housing. So before I came to academia, I went and visited a lot of public housing units, right? And so when I visited all these public housing units, one of the things I saw was it didn't matter if you were Black, Latino, or brown. There was a lot of incestuousness in it, because they're taught to stay in housing so that they can afford, because every time they make money, they lose their housing. So we need a way to make it so that they can actually get out of housing. And data science, web technologies, those are all ways for people to get out of that. And then we can also take care of the housing problem we're having in communities, right? So I say that this informal training combined with deeper training in the universities, we really, someone said this today, that the old, I think Luis Barroso said it, the high-level stuff is always changing, and it constantly needs to change. And academia can't keep up. To be honest, we can't. We don't. Or maybe they do at some universities, but our university, it doesn't. So, but the deep stuff is what a lot of people that go through these informal trainings don't get. So why not make it that we differentiate and collaborate between academia and industry to be able to provide that for people? Make the informal training be a way so that they can have self-confidence enough to get through the formal training. So
thank you.
There you go.
I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, so at the Atlanta University Center, we actually do a lot of academia industry partnerships. We've partnered with Nielsen IQ to to co-develop a course where the students, along with the faculty, who's a social work faculty, did data science with proprietary Coca-Cola data. So I say social work because also this summer, our social work faculty at Clark Atlanta, they're going to lead a data core program for students. So students in the social work program can leverage data science to create solutions for a social work practitioner. So when we do data science, AI, ML, all the L's, what have you, it's not just restricted to computer science or mathematics. It really is across all the disciplines because this technology is really interacting with everyone. So we've been fortunate to, this summer we have a program in chemistry and data science, REU, that was funded, NSF. And last week ran a workshop, NSF funded. It's what happens when you hire a former program officer. But on the intersection of how do you teach data science, the intersection of data sets with those of the African diaspora. What are the data sets? What needs to be taken into account when we have these, we'll say new, or oftentimes difficult conversations when we start talking about ethics, bias in the classroom and stuff. So report will be soon coming. But all that to say, when I started, the people said, aren't you going to work with students? I was like, no, the students are good. I'm working with the faculty. I'm working with staff. I'm working with administration. Because if we think institutional capacity, it really is in the institution, right? The faculty, the administration. And when I was at NSF in my first year, I started the Hispanic Serving Institutions program, and this is a $40 million program, and we were very adamant that it's about, we need to equip the faculty and support whatever they are doing. The students will follow because the faculty will be working with students. So last year we hosted a series of workshops on a wide range of data science, AI topics, and over 200 of our faculty, staff, and grad students went through our workshops, right? And so this summer we're playing with new topics, Python, genomics, that sort of thing. But we have one, we're taking data science and looking at the intersection with prosecutors' offices. So how can we bring we will bring HBCU faculty and researchers to look and partner with prosecutors' offices so we can bring equitable solutions. So we're kind of at that interface, and really in Atlanta, it's like a kid in the playground, like what can we do next? And how we're seeing it as a startup, and how can we do it? But it's our voice who's leading it. It's our voice who's determining how and where this should go. And really, our role is to support the faculty, create that ecosystem where the students can then thrive and grow up and go off and now we're seeing our data science babies go off into graduate school, and they'll be going off into the world and doing great things. But it really is creating a place for them to thrive. And again, our focus really is on building that institutional capacity at the faculty, at the staff level.
Any thoughts from the end there?
I want to add something, because I think there's something that's gone unspoken here, which is, and I know that there are people who are listening to this now who are asking, well, why does any of this really matter? And I think that there are two answers. And the first is because of the science. So a couple of years ago, I guess it's been a couple of years ago now, there was, or maybe less, there was this big piece of cool technology that came out that would take very low-res images and would generate high-res, very realistic high-res images out of it. Several of you out there in the field know what I'm talking about. And it was great. I mean, it's actually a pretty interesting application of AI and machine learning technology. Well, somebody decided, well, let's see what this does with people. I mean, that's what it was being used mostly on, was to do with people. And it turned out they fed Barack Obama, you might have heard of him, through the system, and it turned him into a white man.
Yeah.
And in fact, it turned out that it would take almost anyone we would all recognize as being ethnic into a white person. That any of us would also recognize in our current context. In fact, I got thrown in there somehow, and it took a picture of me, and it turned me into someone who looked exactly like me, except white with blonde hair, and added 40 pounds. I think that's important. That's the thing I really was upset about. And this, by the way, it had an interesting side effect. It made women smile. Oh. Right? And there was all of these things that were happening. And to me, the first question when I saw all this happening was, and I know the people who were producing this, and it's really good work on its own, is how in the world did this happen? Because it didn't occur to anybody, right, to test it on these sorts of things because of the set of people who were in the room, and more importantly, the set of people who weren't in the room, right? And so unless we bring all of these people into these voices, because increasingly, I mean, I say this a lot, we spend a lot of time saying, those of us who are on this panel, saying that, computer science, computing is really important. And we've been saying this for decades. It turns out we were right? But the problem is that once you're right, there's responsibility that comes with it, because you're actually having massive impact on people all around the world, and you're changing and affecting lives. That means then you have to bring in people who are going to be impacted by the work that you do, make them a part of the conversation, because they're going to see things, they're going to understand things that would simply never occur to you because they're outside of your experience. The thing that I like to say, fundamentally, is that we talk about invisibility, and we act as if invisibility is you're standing in front of me and I don't see you, but that's actually not the problem. The problem of invisibility is that you're not in front of me and I don't notice your absence. And that leads to bad science. That leads to bad engineering. That leads to bad design. And so fundamentally, it's important that we talk about these kinds of things and that the ecosystem that's being built brings people in and is inclusive, because it leads to better science. It leads to better engineering. It leads to better design. It leads to better computing. That's reason one. Reason two is because it's the right thing to do.
So can I add something?
We're a little behind, but
I
go
know,
ahead.
but
Go ahead.
everybody else got
on.
to speak, and I did get a chance to speak. So I'll make it. I'll make it relatively fast.
Relatively.
Because I want to build on this point, because the example that Charles was talking about, when you look at who's in the room, not just the people who are being consulted about the deployment of the technology, but who's on the development team, and who's getting the chance to make all those small decisions as the technology is being created, and then being deployed, and then being put out into the world to affect people. And if you think about the pathway from how to get onto that development team, that comes through usually a computer science degree, and we are actually creating this tension in that we need more people to be a part of AI. We need a more diverse workforce, but we also pit students against each other, and it's hyper competitive, and we weed them out. Either you get weeded out in the undergraduate program, either at a Research One institution, maybe you're at a minority serving institution, you try to do graduate school, you might get weeded out there. You may go and work at a big company that's doing lots of things, offering you a salary that may be more than you've ever experienced before, more than your parents have experienced before, but then you get isolated in those environments, and then you get weeded out there, and then you leave computing. And so we have to think about this, and it's something we have to think about as an entire community, as an entire computing community, industry, academia, government. And I think somebody asked, if you want to solve some of these diversity problems, as an individual faculty member, I'm not incentivized to think about diversity. I'm incentivized to maximize publications, students that I graduate, and funding and my citations. And so I believe if we lived up to the spirit of the civil rights legislation that's already on the books in terms of how we fund it, I think you can change this problem immediately.
Yep. Okay, well that's all a great segue, because our next things we wanted to talk about was the promise of AI and some of the downsides. So despite the promise of AI, Talitha, we've also been witness to the downsides of this technology. Bias in AI systems, ethical considerations for autonomous systems, and so on. What would you say, is that the biggest challenge of AI, or is that one of the biggest challenges of AI today?
It's what my fellow panelists said, who's in the room, who's actually creating the technology, and who's not being considered as the technologies are being built. We can think about predictive policing, and this became an issue, a national issue, unfortunately, after George Floyd, but we just remembered Rodney King, which was many decades ago. We can also talk about facial recognition software, which Charles had talked about. We can talk about voter suppression, how people are using AI and other technologies to suppress votes, the modern day Jim Crow sort of thing. So there are many examples of how AI and technologies have negatively impacted certain groups. And now thinking about healthcare, we have AI-related technology in healthcare. So if the technology was not trained on data sets with people that look or act or whatever like me, I could be in physical harm's way. So as we are developing this technology, like my fellow panelists said, we need diverse people in the room contributing, developing the technology, and not as an afterthought, but as an intentional partners, and rethink how we're doing stuff. So I'm just going to go with the movie buff. I probably should have done more James Bond themes today, but I'm going to segue into Jurassic Park. So in Jurassic Park, they were creating dinosaurs. They're running all over the park, and at one part of the film, they took visitors and these investors in and were like, isn't this great? We can sell this, we could do it. And then the doctor, he says this quote, he says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. So we're creating technologies that have the potential to do harm, where people are getting arrested and in a wrong way, where people are putting their health at risk in a wrong way, so it's not let's create the technology so we can get another publication, I can get a grant and I can get an award, I can become a fellow and I could do all these things. No, it's really impacting people. So we as a community really need to think about, should we really be doing this? What are the considerations that we should take into account? Because it's people, it's impacting. It could be a positive impact and it can go bad really fast. So we got to be careful of the dinosaurs.
Yes. Any other thoughts?
I would just add, this is 2 years since George Floyd's murder. Something to think about. I would also say that the AI that we think of today, I don't believe will be the AI of 10 to 15 years from now. It changes very fast. When I came in, it was all about Bayesian inference. Before that, it was neural networks. I think the second go around of neural networks. And so, so I wouldn't, we have a major issue with bias in neural networks, the ones that we think of as AI now. But it's going to change. It's going to get better. Hopefully, get better, and more explainable, more diagnosable. That's the research that we should be working on.
What else should we be worried about?
Is that me?
It's anybody.
I think we talk a lot about the future of work. I think a lot of things are going to get automated really fast, and it's going to be such that I was seeing that you can't even buy a pair of Air Jordans because people have botnets that they've automated that just go through and buy tickets for concerts, Air Jordans, you name it, and then resell it at a higher price. And so me as somebody who's trying to do this individually, manually clicking on the website, I can't necessarily compete with an automated system doing that. How is that going to happen? How should we think about that? Should we be building systems that do that? How do we regulate them? What's the type of research that we should be thinking about in terms of how we automate and deploy these systems? Major questions that we have to answer.
What other things keep you up at night?
Well, so at the end of the day, a lot of our so I'm gonna be very nerdy about it. All of our problems are exponential. Our historic solutions are linear. That's a lost game already, right? So a lot of the things we're talking about have this effect. What's happened is the world has changed so fast. It feels almost like a discontinuity. It's just changing really, really, really fast. First, second, third, nth derivatives are all positive, and it's just going to keep getting faster and faster. There's no way around that. We have to start thinking in terms of discontinuities in order to catch up with it, in order to do something. The real problem with what Chad brought up is not should we build systems like that. The systems are going to be built. The technology is out there. It's going to happen. This is a version. I mean, this is a fundamentally human issue, right? That these things are moving quickly. We have to figure out ways to move quickly with them. It's also fundamentally a national security issue, right? It's beyond all of our individual control. It's beyond the control of any individual organization or government. You've got to have some way to deal with it. The things that I worry about is that exponential, it always looks linear right until you realize you're on the other side of the elbow of the curve. And we're not necessarily thinking that through. And one of the reasons we're not thinking it through is because we aren't educating people into understanding what the consequences of these things are. Because in the short term, none of them are important, or they don't feel important. It's only in the long term that they are. So what keeps me up at night is that the exponentials are still growing. And we're not reacting to it quickly enough. The promise of what we have is that we can make these amazing changes very quickly if we think of AI, machine learning, computing generally as a partnership, right? What I worry about is that, we won't live up to the promise and it'll just sort of spin out of control. But I'm actually, just because this sounds really depressing now that I'm listening to myself, I'm actually very optimistic about it. I don't think the world, it's fine. It's going to be fine so long as we take it seriously.
Okay. So one of the things that keeps me up at night is thinking in access to internet. Because, Puerto Rico, this week we lost a week of school because we didn't have electricity. So electrical grids. And I know that this is happening not just in Puerto Rico. I see Puerto Rico as a microcosm. This is happening in rural places throughout the United States, not so far away. I went to Northeast Maryland, just an hour and a half from here, and I couldn't get internet on my phone. So we really have to start thinking about the rural communities and how we can, like, if we take their talent, again, the idea, the brain drain that is happening to all this, from the rural communities and into the cities is a serious thing. It really is leaving communities without access. So, again, it's great that we now can see that the impossible is possible, like what Luis Barroso said, but we also have to make the possible available. And it's not happening. And the other thing that keeps me up at night is, so yesterday I went to Annapolis because I'm trying to work, now that I'm back at UMBC, I want to do a pilot for my idea in UMBC because I know it'll work there. I'm not sure it'll work in Puerto Rico. So I went to this church. And at this church, I met all these, I met my former boss that's working with this group of white women in Annapolis because they've had 10 children be shot in the public housing in Annapolis. Now we're talking 45 minutes away. So what are they doing? They're basically taking their church, they're building it out. And here, this is what pains me. Like my former boss, who basically got me into computing, her husband has died, so now it's just her, right? And she can't get the money to build something in her community to help this problem. And we have computing that could do this. Computing education, informal computing education. We could put a center right there in the basement of that church. We could put a makerspace right there in the basement of the church. I just saw a poster over there where we're doing dance to code. This is what I've been waiting for. I love to dance, and many women, Latina women and African American, dance is so important in our space. Georgia Tech, we have a collaboration with Georgia Tech. You probably don't know this. It's called Remezcla, where they have ear sketch, and they're teaching in African American communities to code by music, how to write music, rapping, and doing all that. So what are we doing? We're adding to their repertoire. I don't know if you know this, but
it's good.
Yeah.
And so we're doing that to basically put in Latin rhythms in there. So what if we could do that for Native Americans? What if we can do that for, it doesn't even have to stay just with the US, but these targeted communities are really suffering. We could do it with country music in the really rural communities. So I just want to emphasize the importance of creating a sense of belonging. It's not just about inclusion. People have to feel like they belong in coding from a very small, from the time they're small to the time they're adults. And they have to feel like they belong in it, even when they're older and go back.
So we're going to take some audience questions. So I hope people have some queued up. And if there are ones, Haley, if there are ones coming from the remote audience, please chime in. Please go ahead. Oh wait, I don't think it's on yet.
I think they have to turn it on. He's on his way.
Should automate that.
Let's try to keep them.
Hi. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
A little bit. Just go for it.
All right. My name is Lana. I'm one of the CI fellows here. And one thing I just wanted to say is it means so much to me to see you all up here. I'm the daughter of Trinidadian immigrants, and it's just crazy to see you all up here. I really was not expecting this from an AI panel, so fantastic job in selecting a committee, and it's great to hear this conversation, and I'm really proud to see you all up here and see the Caribbean represented. I was thinking a lot, and I think a lot about how people do have that, we've all touched on this, on how people will invest all this time in their education to become experts in computer science and then be isolated and pushed out, and how important it is to not have that happen in AI and in ML. And, it shouldn't be on them, it shouldn't be on us to, just fight it out. We can't prepare people to, the solution to this, I think, is not to just, try and arm our students in a way where they are fighting institutionalized racism on their own. We want to change those institutions. So I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on how we could create a space specifically in AI and ML where people, have the voice to speak out and point out these issues, but also have institutionalized protection from the attacks that they face when they do speak out. Because we have seen, fantastic Black researchers speak out about artificial intelligence in companies and then be pushed out of those companies and punished for it. So how can we institutionalize that protection so they're not on their own?
Thank you.
I have one idea right now. There's this thing called social enterprises that the Department of Justice is already investing in. Social enterprises are used for minoritized populations typically, and they're using it for people who are incarcerated. So why not have social tech enterprises for people who have been traditionally marginalized in tech, where they can have that protection until they get to the point where they, can get enough credibility to move on, or until they create their own enterprises or they become entrepreneurs, and then create those, places where people can be safe. So that's one idea.
So we take the mantra, we just build our own. I'll find a way to make one. I don't recommend that for young people. Tell the old people what we should be doing so we can build that structure for you. So, it really is that simple. So in our space, as far as like data science and bringing the diverse perspectives and actually amplifying that voice, we take a very concerted effort. So we build it, and people are like, well, doesn't this exist over? No, it doesn't. So we're going to build it. We're just going to define it. We just create our own. I think that mantra kind of stuck with me when I was faculty at Howard University, right up the way here, was you just roll up your sleeves and just build and do it, right? One of the slogans I remember for the advanced project there, it was, it must be us. Mm-hmm. So if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Again, I don't recommend the young people to build it. You tell the old people right here. Right here. We fill of old people?
We are.
Okay. These are the structures that are needed. This is what I need in order to thrive. And we are responsible because we have been there. We understand. And we're at positions now where we can actually create those pathways and create those infrastructures. But it can't just be those from underrepresented groups building those infrastructures. It needs to be partnerships across folks. But we really just need to take ownership and just build it and create a place where all can thrive and contribute.
So I just wanted to say that that really there has to be an economic incentive in the marketplace to provide those protections, to incentivize diversity. Right now, we don't have those incentives. When I think back to the civil rights movement of the 60s, it was about getting opportunity and making sure that people had those economic opportunities, professional opportunities available. And right now, we're trying to decide as a society, do those protections make sense? And it's something that I think higher education as the spring well for innovation, for new ideas, and most importantly, for educated people, that's something that we're having to deal with on the ground in the AI classroom and the AI research labs.
So we have a bunch of questions waiting, and we have 6 minutes. So let's try to do one person responding to each question. No, stay, Katie. Go ahead.
Hello.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Rafael. I'm a CI fellow, and my background is originally from my PhD is in human-computer interaction from University of Washington, and now I'm at California Institute of Technology in kind of theoretical AI group. So it's also an interesting experience for me. So I have maybe a bit of a loaded question related to kind of bias. I'm working on the issues of social bias, toxicity, and things like this related specifically to language models. But so you touched upon some of these aspects of, for example, the striking example, how the models basically probabilistically reconstruct what's the majority, let's say, class or image that you would expect. And of course, the natural thing from the kind of AI community is to try to fix it. So what's the correct answer? And you fix the model, which is obvious in some cases, but in the cases, for example, of like toxicity or social biases, there are things like, for example, toxicity. You can have reasonable people disagree on what's the correct, you would say, label for things, and in some ways that becomes very difficult to fix with AI, because if you as a person fixing it know what the answer is, so how are you going to apply it? And AI doesn't seem like it's going to figure out for us what are the right answers for this kind of social issues. On top of that, these features are evolving, so the definitions of bias and toxicity 10 years ago is going to be quite different than right now. So I guess it's like an open question on your thoughts on this. Like, how do you see approaching fixing the AI when some of the correct answers are something we don't agree on, something that evolves for us? And even if you are able to do it, for example, like language models are known to show that, for example, women and men are associated with different professions, and you would say this is a type of bias. But if you want to fix it and equalize things, then this model no longer reflects the reality. So yeah, you fixed it, but it creates like a fake representation of what the society is, which you may not want to do because you don't want the model to be itself completely disassociated with what the reality is. Anyway, it's an open question.
Let's have one short answer to this.
All right, I'll give you one short answer in that this is why we need engagement across the academy. Me, as a computer scientist, as an AI researcher, I'm not necessarily equipped to define what the ontology is over all of the answers, all of the language models, all the labels that we should be thinking about. I need to consult with my colleagues in the social sciences, humanities across the board. And it would be great if we invested in that more.
I think it's worse, quickly, very quickly,
Yeah.
I think it's worse than you're not trained for it. I think we're trained to not care.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move. Take the question.
Hi, I'm
The
Francisco.
dance gentleman.
Yeah. I'm Francisco Castro from New York University. I'm the one doing the dance and computing research back there. So my question is, so there was a mention earlier about diversifying pipelines by bringing diverse identities and people into the field, the professoriate, the academia, and our fields in general. But we also know that our fields in academia and research are also built on structures that are marginalizing and exclusive. So what are your thoughts on this idea of building and reinforcing pipelines and programs to bring people in, when those pipelines and programs can lead people into broken systems and structures that could further harm them, or, as said earlier, weed them out because of the way that these environments are just structurally and systematically broken?
I'll just go back to what I said previously. We build our own. So coming from historically black colleges and universities, right? We've been around for a while, and we're started in this country because we could not have access to education. So if you think from the HBCU perspective, we build our own, we educate our own, we have high expectations, high supports. We expect our students to go out and be that person to go to get a graduate degree, go change the world. I'm a graduate of Spelman College, and our slogan is a choice to change the world. So it's not about, and I like to use pathways, not pipeline. Pipeline to me is very just one path. But pathways in from different facets, because if we think about AI, people come into AI, data science, ML from different disciplines. There's not one way in. So how do we create pathways so people can come in? But it really is about building our own at the university level, at the community level, and also at the business level. So I'm very much, and I come from the cradle of the civil rights movement in Atlanta. So that's threaded into what we do, which may not be something that is in your sphere, but come to Atlanta.
I'm going to say one thing real quick.
We really do need to move on.
Can I just say, instead of pathways, just think streams.
There we go. Okay.
That's all I wanted to say, because it really has to be that diverse, and coming from the mountains and the communities that they come from. How's that?
Diverse pathways.
Diverse pathways. Good.
Hi, I'm Katie Seek from Indiana University, and I'm right now a PI of a REU site. It's 8 weeks long, and I budget 2.5 days for myself. It doesn't even cover childcare to deal with that 8-week site. And so when I talk to NSF, they say, Katie, I'm just scrapping money so you can do this REU, which is super important, but I also have to fund innovative research. So in 10 years, when we celebrate the 40th year of NITRD, how do we do this? How do we do the pipeline? How do we fund innovative research and bring everyone through the streams, pathways, what have you?
It depends on how the people in our community who sit on the panels, the review panels, they make the decisions. They choose what our field's going to be. It's our colleagues. We have to socialize that. We have to incentivize that behavior. We have to understand that budgets turn into values. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, really, it comes down to not just the money, but what we expect of that money at the end of the day. But we could talk more about that offline.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 45 seconds left on our clock, and what we would like to end with is a very quick, what is the one thing that you would hope that we all take away from this panel Charles, Chad, Patty, Talitha.
I get the feeling I know what they're going to say, so I'm going to say something different. There's a name for this. I can't remember what it is, but you'll all Google it and you'll figure out who coined this term. We tend to overestimate the short-term impact of the things we build and underestimate the long-term impact. And what I want people to understand and to think about is that it's really the long-term impact, and we're not thinking about it correctly, and that's what we need to do to make AI useful.
Awesome.
Federal funding of artificial intelligence, of computing research in general, has produced immense return on investment. Immense. There's no better way to spend your money. But the question is, are we still committed as a society to have that funding live up to our values and also be the beacon of innovation across the world?
I think we also need to think of the hierarchy, as we build streams for people into pathways into computing, we also need to build streams for the universities, like the college, community colleges, where a lot of people can afford to go, and build streams and pathways for them, for people to move up, and retraining of that staff, because it's hard to hire data scientists and computer scientists in those communities.
And the last word.
Recognize our privilege as AI, computer scientists, as researchers in this field, and also recognize our responsibility that we have not only to the field, but also to the broader impacts of society.
Well, with that, thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.
Yes, well done.